In the early 20th century, a single Native American tribe, the Osage Nation, became the wealthiest people per capita in the entire world. But this incredible fortune, it didn't bring security. Nope. Instead, it brought a shadow of greed, betrayal, and a truly horrifying conspiracy of murder. We're about to dive into a really dark and honestly an often overlooked chapter of American history.
So what exactly was the Osage Reign of Terror? That's the big question we're going to unpack here. It's a chilling story about what happens when sudden wealth meets deep-seated prejudice and how a brutal series of crimes actually helped spur the birth of the modern FBI.
Okay, so picture this. In the early 1920s, in Osage County, Oklahoma, a really sinister pattern starts to emerge. One by one, wealthy members of the Osage Nation are dying. And these aren't natural deaths. They're mysterious, often incredibly violent. And as the bodies started piling up, local authorities were either totally baffled or, and this is way more disturbing, just unwilling to find the people responsible.
The newspapers back then, they gave this period a name that sticks with you. They called it the Reign of Terror. And as you're about to see, that name was tragically, horribly accurate.
Between 1918 and 1931, the official death toll climbed to over 60 people. But here's the chilling reality, and folks like author David Grann have dug deep into this. That number is probably just the tip of the iceberg. The true number of suspicious deaths could literally be in the hundreds, with so many murders just swept under the rug, covered up, or dismissed as accidents.
And these weren't just statistics, These were real people. People like Anna Brown, whose body was found in a ravine. Her death at first just dismissed. Her cousin, Charles Whitehorn, was found shot to death on the very same day. And then there was Anna's sister, Rita Smith. Her home was just obliterated by a bomb. This wasn't some random violence. It was a cold, calculated, and brutal campaign of terror.
So you have to be asking, why? Why was all this happening? Well, to understand the motive, you just have to follow the money. And in Osage County, that money was flowing from one thing: black gold, oil. Get this. In a single year, 1923, the Osage tribe took in over $30 million from oil royalties. To put that in perspective for you, that's more than $400 million today. It made them, per person, the wealthiest people on the entire planet. No contest.
Now, the key to all this incredible wealth was something called a head right. Basically, every single member of the tribe was granted a share of all that mineral money. But here's the crucial part. These head rights could be inherited. So when an Osage member died, their share passed on to their legal heir, and that heir did not have to be Osage. This one little detail, well, it created a deadly, deadly incentive for murder.
The Osage were living lives of unbelievable prosperity. We're talking mansions, chauffeured cars, servants, the finest clothes, sending their kids to the best private schools. But all of this visible wealth, it was like a magnet for criminals and schemers who looked at the Osage people and didn't see human beings. They just saw obstacles standing in the way of a fortune.
But the whole conspiracy wasn't just about violence. The killers also turned the law into a weapon, taking advantage of a corrupt system that was supposed to protect the Osage, but instead was used to control their money.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. The very act of being responsible and saving her money was used as proof that she was incompetent. This quote just perfectly captures how racist and predatory this whole guardian system really was.
This law basically opened the floodgates for abuse. Local courts, which were often in on the whole scheme, would appoint white lawyers and businessmen as these so-called guardians. And these guys would get total control over their ward's money, creating this powerful incentive for theft, for fraud, and, as we've seen, for murder.
So out of this corrupt system, this cold, calculated playbook for stealing a fortune emerged. Step 1, marry into an Osage family. Step 2, murder the relatives one by one to concentrate all the head rights in your spouse. And the final, most brutal step, kill your spouse and inherit the whole thing. It's just unbelievable.
With local law enforcement being either corrupt or just completely useless, the Osage Tribal Council finally appealed to the federal government for help. And this led to one of the very first major homicide investigations for a brand new agency, the Bureau of Investigation, which, as you know, would later become the FBI. The investigation pretty quickly started to focus on one man, William Hale. Now, this guy presented himself as a great friend and benefactor to the Osage. He was known as the king of the Osage Hills, but in reality, he was a ruthless puppet master, pulling the strings on this whole murder conspiracy from the shadows. His power and influence had kept him safe for years.
Okay, this timeline, it just lays out Hale's horrifying plot against one family. It starts with a marriage. Hale's nephew, Ernest, marries an Osage woman named Molly Kyle. And then, almost immediately, her family starts dying. First, her sister Anna is murdered. Then her cousin Henry is killed. And what do you know? Hale was the beneficiary of his life insurance policy. A month later, her sister Rita is killed in that bombing. It was only when Ernest Burkhart finally cracked under questioning that the whole thing unraveled, and he pointed the finger right at his uncle, William Hale.
And just when you think it can't get any more horrifying, it does. After all her family was gone, Molly herself was the final target. The investigators, they were actually alerted by her priest, and they discovered that her own husband, Ernest, was slowly poisoning her. They managed to step in just in the nick of time.
The trials of William Hale and his crew were a massive national sensation. But the story, it doesn't just end with a simple guilty verdict. The legacy of this betrayal would stretch on for generations.
So, William Hale, his nephew Ernest, and the hitman John Ramsey, they were all convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Justice served, right? Well, not so fast. Look at the outcome. Despite these absolutely horrific crimes, every single one of them was eventually paroled. Ernest Burkhart was even given a full pardon by the governor of Oklahoma in 1966. Unbelievable.
Because of the national outcry, Congress did finally act. This 1925 law was a huge deal. It was designed to get rid of that main motive for murder by stopping non-Osage from inheriting head rights. A really necessary step, but one that came far too late for dozens and dozens of victims.
And the injustice didn't stop in the 1920s. For decades, the federal government continued to mismanage the Osage trust funds. It actually wasn't until 2011 that the U.S. government settled a lawsuit with the Osage Nation for $380 million to try and compensate for all that mismanagement.
And that really brings us to the final, haunting question. Because while William Hale and his inner circle were brought to justice, most of the murders from that time are still unsolved. It just leaves you to wonder how deep this conspiracy really went, and whether the full, horrifying truth of the Osage Reign of Terror will ever truly be known.